Oh, speaking of two teams that are rivals that hate each other, they're the first game that we're talking about here on Sunday. 3 p.m. Eastern time is when this one is getting kicked off. As we do with all of these shows, we're going to give you a matchup that matters. We're going to give you the plus factor that we think is going to be a big difference maker. So this is round 3. Philadelphia Eagles won the first one when they were at home. The Washington Commanders won the second one heroically from Jayden Daniels when they were at home. This one's now in Philly. Matchup that matters, Carmen. What do we got?
Yeah, I'm going to go to the one that is probably going to matter the most, as low-hanging fruit as it is, and it's that Washington run defense against Saquon Barkley. This is what I'm sure we talked about this when we talked about these two teams meeting in the regular season, because that's what this kind of stuff comes down to. You saw in this last game just how incredibly potent Saquon Barkley can be, no matter the elements, no matter what's going on. I believe he's 148 yards short of the record that includes the postseason, the single season rushing record that includes the postseason. And he averaged 148 yards against the Commanders this season. So there's a chance he can break it. There's a chance that they're going to, I mean, there's not a chance they're going to run him. You know, they're going to run him. And especially against this Washington defense, run defense that hasn't necessarily been the best unit. 18th in EPA per carry allowed this season. And if you look at that game against the Detroit Lions, the Lions had 71 rushing yards over expectations. And you could argue that they should have run the ball more versus the Commanders. I mean, I think a lot of us were surprised just how they kind of abandoned Jahmyr Gibbs, who was averaging, he ended the game averaging 7.5 yards a carry. And despite the fact that they were down and all of that, we know how explosive Jahmyr Gibbs can be. Why the Lions kind of abandoned that mentality like halfway through the game, it didn't make a whole lot of sense, especially when you consider that this has been kind of a weakness for the Commanders defense. Jahmyr Gibbs had a career high 5 runs of 10 or more yards. So it's not just that they're giving up rushes or yards on a per rush basis. They're also giving up explosives on the ground if you're Washington. And you look at what Saquon Barkley does best, and he's a guy that is capable of so many explosive runs. That 62-yard touchdown late in the first quarter against the Rams, 78-yard touchdown to give the Eagles the 2-possession lead in the fourth. Like, this is something that Saquon Barkley is so good at, and I don't think it's a good matchup for the Commanders defense in particular. So that's what I'm looking at. And then we're going to see. So usually when you're talking about the Eagles run game, you're not actually just talking about Saquon either. As good as he is, you're talking about Jalen Hurts factoring into that. Mm-hmm. And he did suffer that left knee injury in the third quarter of this last game. Prior to that, 71 rushing yards on 6 carries, which included that 44-yard touchdown run that he had on the game's opening drive. So he can be a factor in that. How much of a factor he's going to be with that injury remains to be seen, obviously. But even if it is Saquon that has to carry this, he's better than pretty much everybody in the league at doing it. And he's better at the yards after contact. It's not just, can you get to Saquon before he gets past the line of scrimmage? It's, can you get him down after that? Because he had 93 yards before contact in this last game. And then, which is, I guess, just the 7th time a player has generated 75 yards or more before contact. And he had over 100 yards after contact in that game. So he's getting a running start. And you can't let him do that. And that's something that the Washington Commanders have struggled with as far as missed tackles against the run, that kind of stuff. You really, really need to be sound, mind your gaps, all of that kind of stuff against the best rusher in the league.
Yeah, and it's just running the ball is, as you explained there, it's more than just Saquon Barkley. It's Philly up front. It's Jalen Hurts involved in it. But Washington has sort of struggled in this area throughout the season. Bobby Wagner's been great at it, but outside of Bobby Wagner, there's not a lot of high run defense grades throughout that team. And so first and foremost, the way that you beat the Philadelphia Eagles is you stop the run. So there's no doubt about it that if they cannot do that, you're sort of forcing the offense and Jayden Daniels to get into a little bit of a shootout. Now, that's exactly what played out last week because they couldn't stop Jahmyr Gibbs. They couldn't really stop David Montgomery, who still averaged 4 yards per carry, even though he didn't have a heavy carry load. I believe Jahmyr Gibbs, 7.5 yards per carry. Obviously, the Jameson Williams, 61 yards per carry because he had the one run for 61 yards in that touchdown. But the Lions sort of imposed their will on the ground. It was just that they then had to try to keep up with what Washington was doing in their passing game. And Jared Goff gave the ball away a couple of times. And so
Right.
that's what ended up making the difference. But, you know, if you do that against Philly, Philly's not really a team that's going to turn the ball over. They don't really do that a lot. Jalen Hurts really hasn't been put in those situations to be able to do so. You know, he hasn't had a lot of big time throws. I'm going to get to that in a second. But yeah, not a lot of turnover worthy plays either. He hasn't really been asked to put the ball in harm's way because he hasn't really been asked to push the ball deep down the field. So I agree with you. I think it's a major matchup that matters. I'll go to the other side of things. I'm going to talk about Washington's interior offensive line versus Jalen Carter specifically. That is the matchup that matters for me because Sam Cosmi, their best offensive lineman, tears his ACL last week, which just absolutely sucks. There's no way around it.
Horrible.
So Trent Scott comes in. Trent Scott's been around the league for a number of years. I think it's his 6th or 7th year in the league. 85.0 overall blocking grade on 26 snaps last week against Detroit. So good. All right. The veteran's coming in. He's doing what he needs to do. Short notice. Obviously, you never think that you're going to be out Sam Cosmi. And so he's able to come in and play that game pretty well at that spot. So there's a couple of different ways that they could mitigate this and handle this injury. One, they could just plug Scott back in again and have him play that guard spot for Cosmi. They also could, if they wanted to, slide Andrew Wiley from the tackle spot inside to guard because they also have the veteran Cornelius Lucas, who, if they feel better about that veteran presence, and he's been an on and off starter for them this season, and he's been very, very familiar. I think this is his 4th or 5th year with Washington, so they know him very well. If they want that veteran presence here in this NFC Championship game, they could play him at tackle and move Wiley inside. So it'll be interesting to see which strategy they will go with there. But ultimately, the thing that they have to worry about is simply who matches up best against Jalen Carter, if there is such a thing. Because when Jalen Carter is playing the way that he was last week and that he has throughout this season, he's a game wrecker. 84.6 pass rush grade from Jalen Carter last week, 8 pressures by himself and 2 sacks. And a couple of those pressures, I mean, like, he's winning within half a second. I mean, the rep is already won before 1 second after the ball is snapped. And that's just how devastating this guy can be. So ultimately, that's the biggest question mark. Because for as much as I think that Jayden Daniels can make up a lot of magic happen, and interior pressure is not the kiss of death for this team because of the way that Jayden can escape the pocket and who he can be as a runner, but also as a passer when he is retreating out of the pocket. Those things sort of save him in that regard. But whenever he's trying to stand in the pocket and scan the field, if Jalen Carter's going to be there within 1.5 seconds, it's hard to even think that Jayden Daniels is going to stand a chance against this. So that's a big time matchup that matters. How they are going to deal with the loss of Sam Cosmi, not just in the run game, which they also need to stay strong in the run game. It's how they're going to match up with Jalen Carter and not let him be a single player game wrecker against you. What about your plus factor here? Who do you got?
That honestly goes right into my plus factor because, okay, if worse comes to worse, guess who scrambles the most in the NFL? It's Jayden Daniels.
Yes,
so as a quarterback,
among
quarterbacks, scrambles the most in the NFL. And it's coupled with it. It's not just Jayden Daniels' scramble ability that is my plus factor. It's his scramble ability on crucial downs because he has been among the best at converting some of these 3rd down, 4th down attempts with his legs, or at least throwing on the run after scrambling. This is also one of the most aggressive teams on 4th down. So they really do make you defend all 4 downs. And that's by design. I think it's funny that, these two teams went against each other in the Lions and the Commanders last week, that the Lions, I think you would argue, were known more for going forward on 4th down, their aggressive mentality. I'm using aggressive loosely because my whole thing over the last couple of weeks has been like, do we really need to call this aggressive anymore? If you're in plus territory, short yardage on 4th down, doesn't it just make sense to go for it?
You're right.
But that's something that has really taken hold in Washington, and Dan Quinn is doing that better than anyone. Going into that game, the Commanders were converting they had an 87% success rate on 4th down. Not only that, averaging 9.9 yards per 4th down attempt, which is wild. You're basically getting a whole nother set of sticks there on 4th down. And it's because of what Jayden Daniels can do on the scramble. It's something that I just think that if you want to keep this team, on its heels, off the field, limit them, because we know that Jayden Daniels has only grown. He's only ascending. He's throwing the ball down the field really, really well, captaining this offense. He does not look like a rookie out there. Get them off the field on third down, on fourth down. Make it so it's third and long and it becomes fourth and long. Because in those short yardage situations, Dan Quinn has showed that he's going to go for it, and he's going to continue to go for it. That's the biggest thing too, is you've seen in the last 2 games in the postseason with the Commanders, it hasn't worked every time. But that doesn't mean that Dan Quinn doesn't go back to it. They didn't get it on 4th and 1 early in that Bucks game, but Dan Quinn still went back and did it again and again. Same thing against the Lions. So they converted 3 of 4 fourth down attempts against the Lions, and it's just. They are so incredibly, that can just break a defense's will. And I think that's your best shot at contending with Philly, is trying to break the will of that defense. For as good as they are, if you can convert on 4th down over and over again, that gets to be real, real old. So I really think that can be the biggest factor for Washington to pull off this upset, is if Jayden Daniels can convert on those 3rd and 4th downs, but do it with his legs, do it where he's not relying on the offensive line to hold his pocket, which he hasn't really been doing. Like I said, most scrambles of any quarterback in the league this year. That's something that I'm really looking forward to and seeing if he rises to that occasion, because so far, no moment has been too big for Jayden Daniels.
I agree. I nothing that we have seen yet tells us that, the clock's going to strike midnight on Jayden Daniels for this NFC Championship game. I don't think it's going to be the case. In fact, I think the opposite. I think that we might see still the best version of him with the chance to go to the Super Bowl on the line, which brings me to my plus factor in this one, which is Jalen Hurts. For as good as I think that the Eagles' run game is, as much as they are going to lean on Saquon Barkley, I believe, just like Jayden Daniels did against the Buccaneers, just like he did against the Detroit Lions, his presence and how this offense plays will push the Philadelphia Eagles out of their comfort zone a little bit. And with that, Jalen will have to make some big time throws in this game. And he has not been asked to do that and has not done that for a while. Hurts has not had a multi-big time throw game since week 10. Now, obviously, he missed a little bit of time there in concussion protocol, but since week 10, he has not had a multi-big time throw game. And the only game in which he had a big time throw was last week. Prior to that, it was 0 big time throws since week 10. He has not recorded a single game passing grade above 70 since week 9. Philly is this good. They have this good of a record. And they have the home field advantage in this game as the 2 seed in the NFC without asking their quarterback to do a lot. And Jalen Hurts really just elevates their floor. He doesn't turn the ball over. He's a great short yardage option when it comes to the run game. But in this game, I truly believe he is going to be asked to throw the ball deep down the field. The situation at some point will require it. And he's got the wide receivers and he's got the weapons to be able to do it, but he hasn't done it in quite a long time. He hasn't done it multiple times in quite a long time. So to me, that's the ultimate plus factor, because I think these teams know each other well. I think Jayden's going to be very ready for this game. And I think there's going to be a point where Washington is up on the scoreboard late in the second half, and Jalen Hurts is going to be facing a 3rd and 11, a 3rd and 14, a 3rd and 9, whatever it is. And he's going to have to hit a big time throw down the field. And if he cannot do that, I genuinely think that Washington can win and go to the Super Bowl. But if Hurts does give us some of those big time throws while limiting the turnover worthy plays, I think Philly's got the better roster top to bottom. So that's why, to me, he is the ultimate plus factor, because they're going to need him. And if he shows up, I think they're going to the Super Bowl. But if he can't, you better believe that Washington's going to be right there for it. Thanks for watching, everybody. Make sure you like and subscribe the video. And if you don't have a PFF Plus subscription, you can get one to see all the premium stats that we talked about here on the show, plus the expert betting and fantasy advice over at subscribe.pff.com. The description is also right below, so if you are not a PFF Plus subscriber, you can become one today.